middle bit where I'm talking about fields of inquiry. This was put together by myself and the very brilliant Dr. Thanasis Velios, who is the chair of the Research Degrees Subcommittee at Camberwell, Chelsea and Wimbledon. So this is all about the registration stage. Some of it may be a bit dull and bureaucratic, but I think it's all necessary for you to understand exactly what this means. Next slide, please. Right, so this is what the famous AFR form, or application for registration form, looks like. It's a combination of things that get filled in by you, things that get filled in by the supervisory team, but of course, all the bits that are filled in by you are also reviewed by your supervisory team. And at the top, you know, the simple stuff, your first name, your surname, your college, whether you're studying part-time or full-time, and whether you are registered for an MPhil or PhD. Now, usually people register for what's called an unspecified research degree and don't elect for MPhil at the beginning, but sometimes they do. Oh, I can move the slides on, actually. It's fine, Lucy, don't worry. Now, anyone, by the way, anyone from RMA or Lucy, contradict me if any of these facts are wrong at any point, but at the moment you can download the application for registration form from the UAL Postgraduate Hub, and there it is with the circle drawn around it. So it's easy to access. You download the form from the Postgraduate Hub in the section labeled Forms. Now, here's something. There's a section on the form called Resources. And please be careful when thinking about this, because it says resources and special considerations. Now, what this is really for is if you have come with a particular piece of equipment or workshop facility in mind that you've talked to your potential supervisors about, or your actual supervisors about, and you know it's held by the university and you want to access it, this is where you signal it. You say, well, I've discussed with my team accessing the textiles workshops for certain purposes during certain times or something like that. What you can't do is say, oh, I wouldn't mind using the particle accelerator because we haven't got one. Nor can it be a wish list of things you might like to have. This is only for things that this university already has that you would like to access. It's your way of signaling your intention to access so that this can be registered with your team and your team know, and the College Research Degrees Subcommittee know that you requested this, and therefore that gives us a bit of ammunition. If there's any problem, we can say, look, the students said this at the very beginning, they wanted this resource, can't we negotiate access, so forth and so on. So please use this carefully. It's not a wish list, and please don't put things we just don't have. Training needs, it might be that you have at this point particular training needs you want to signal, such as, I'd really like to access oral history training at some point, or I really think I need something else on ethics. So just so as we know what we might have to find for you in terms of training. So please use that section carefully. Now, we come to ethics. Now, it used to be the case that we asked every student to fill in an ethics form to sort of say what the ethical issues were in their PhD at the beginning at registration stage. We don't do that anymore. We ask you to fill in the ethics form when you start doing research that requires ethical clearance. However, it's jumping about a bit. However, it is on the form that you tick, I have read and understood the university's Code of Practice on Research Ethics. And you can reach this without any trouble just by Googling UAL Code of Practice on Research Ethics, and you'll find it. You are required to read this for reasons I will go on to explain. You're required to read it so that you will know whether or not you're going to have to fill in an ethics form immediately or in the near future. Because if you're doing work that requires interviews, if you're working with vulnerable people, even if you're interviewing museum curators, you're going to need an ethics form an ethics clearance as soon as you start researching, and ethics clearance can take a while to get. So although we're not insisting that you do a form at this stage, we are insisting that you consider, first of all, whether or not and how you might have to get ethical clearance, and that you've read the university's code of practice on research ethics so you know what is at stake. And then you say, I've considered any ethics involved in using participants in my research, and I'll have to submit this, what's technically called a post-registration ethics approval form to the College Research Degrees Subcommittee and receive approval before undertaking research that requires ethical approval. So before you begin to do anything that requires ethical approval, you must fill in this form. I'm now going to tell you something scary. If you don't get ethical approval for research that requires ethical approval, when you get to Viva, all that research could be requested to be removed from your PhD. That's how bad it can get. I know I'm getting severe and scary here, but this is my duty of care bit, because I really don't want you to do this. If you're doing anything that would require ethical approval, and consult your team about this, you have to fill in the post-registration ethics form. Now, what happens with this is that you fill in the form, it goes to the local committee in your college, and the local committee considers it, and they say, well, this is fairly, this has been well worked out. They've considered all the possible ethical issues. It's fairly low risk. It's fine. In which case, it doesn't necessarily go forward to the University Ethics Committee, although it may get sampled by that committee just to check how local committees are drawing the boundary between minor risk and major risk. So it's not a big deal. It's just something you have to do before you start research that requires this. So just please make sure that you do this form for everything, because otherwise that could invalidate all the research you do and all the data you get from that research. And then health and safety also. And health and safety and ethics are not the same thing. Health and safety is about health and safety. Ethics is about values, and as I will come to, it's about certain key things you have to consider. Health and safety, here are the things to look out for. What are the hazards of doing what I'm doing? Will anyone get hurt? What are the risks? And then what are the mitigations? If something as simple as leaving a trailing wire on the floor that somebody can trip over is a risk. So how do I mitigate the risk? Well, I tape it to the floor. That's a very simple, very obvious question of how you deal with a risk. So you have to fill in that if you're doing anything that might, require trailing wires or rotating blades or anything of that kind. So ethics is a bit more complex. And here, although I'm insisting that you should all read the Code of Practice on Research Ethics, here are 3 things that you perhaps should, some benchmarks to focus on. When we talk about ethics, we talk firstly about respect for persons. All individuals who you involve in your research have to make their own choices and decisions, and they protect vulnerable persons. And you will see on every single ethics form, it says something like, you have the right to withdraw from this research at any point without giving a reason. And that is one example of you saying, look, I know you said you'd do this, but I respect you as a person, I respect your choice, and if you wish to take yourself out of this research at any point, that is your right. Protect vulnerable persons. If you're working with people who can be deemed as vulnerable, then that may require working with gatekeepers or a host of other things that you can discuss with your supervisory team. The next thing is the principle of justice. Distribute equally the risks and benefits to participating people. So if you're asking me to get involved in your research, what do I get out of it? I might just kind of, a data resource for you, or am I a person in my own right, again, to go back to point 1, who can make their own decisions and who can benefit from your research? And in what ways will I benefit from your research? Let me know. And finally, beneficence. Neither doing nor permitting any foreseeable harm as the consequence of research, and that includes you as well as your subjects. To state the obvious, if you are interviewing people, try and avoid doing it in their home because it could put you at risk. consider the question of whether you might traumatize them if difficult subjects come up. Think about, again, your own risks of getting too involved in other people's lives. There are a whole, so just to point out, this cuts both ways. Don't do any harm to yourself, don't do any harm to others. So those are three things that would, pertain, three of the main things that pertain to understanding ethics. And if you think right now, take a pause, think about your research and say, is there anything I'm about to do in this research which would involve me working with people in such a way that I will have to signal or make clear my respect for them as persons, distribute the benefits, and cause no harm to them or myself. If this is something that you're going to have to get involved in, then you will have to fill in an ethics form and submit it. So again, I issue my scary warning about all that data getting taken away if you don't get ethical clearance for it. I'm going to stop doing that now. Right. Simple stuff. Section B, this is filled in information by your director of studies. They say who they are and how many PhDs they have successfully supervised to completion. And then you will have another supervisor, and then maybe you'll have a third supervisor, and they fill in that bit. So that's not to be filled in by you, that's to be filled in by them. And this is section C, the part where you write 1,000 words. Sorry, Lucy, I think somebody's saying the session is timed out. Is that an issue?
Huh. I'm just not. I'll pick that up independently. I'm fine. So let's assume fine. The majority are.
I will move on. Okay. So this is where you talk about your subject area, research questions, aims, objectives, research context, and methodology. I'm going to go through all these things bit by bit, but I want to make a general point, which I've made before. When you are writing this, use short, clear sentences. And those sentences should say what you mean and mean what you say. There is absolutely no benefit to you or anyone else in fancy or complex writing. It just gets in the way of you telling us what your research is about. So don't think, oh, I've got to be, a highfalutin academic. You don't. You just have to be someone writing clearly. That's all we want you to be. Write clearly. Write in short, clear sentences, and obviously back these things up by evidence. Try to avoid using phrases like "in my opinion," because that's nice to have an opinion, but what we're looking for here is research in the sense of the pursuit of investigation that has a field of inquiry, a landscape of research you're negotiating in various ways. So it's not simply all about you, although it is about you in the sense that you're making it very clear to us that in this research landscape, you're doing something interesting, something new, something that really should be noticed. And if you can say that by saying, well, look, here's the field, here's the issues, here's the debates, but here's the work that needs to be done, then we will love you for it. So just general point, short, clear sentences, say what you mean what you say, don't overcomplicate your writing. There's never any point to it. And also, when we get to Viva, examiners will tend to get cross with you if they can't understand what you're writing about. Indicative bibliography, I'll come to that later, but it says include archives, collections, and web references if relevant. There are various bits of software to help you build bibliography. I'm a late middle-aged man and I don't use those, but I know they're a great benefit. So please use them. I know that Thanasis really encourages using bibliographic software. Visual material, please do, if you are doing a practice-based project, include visual material. It is relevant, it is information, it is stuff we need to know. We need to know what your practice, if you can, it's not obligatory, but it would be really great if we can see some images. Please put those in, because practice-based research, a lot of people are doing practice-based research. Let's see the practice. Even if this isn't the practice you think you're going to end up with, even if it's just indicating where you are, it's really helpful to us to see this, because we see it maybe in a gallery context, we see what kind of work it is. There are many things one can learn from seeing the practice. So I would really encourage you to use this section. Quite often people just don't put anything in there, and that's a real shame. Okay, then just towards the end of the form, you get to the student declaration. I wish to register, I conform all this case, and then the Director of Studies signs it off on behalf of the team. That's all very obvious. Now, here's the thing. Just here's the bit. You know, if you're wondering what happens to your form when you submit it, it goes first of all to the top of the form. It says CRDSC. All that means is College Research Degrees Subcommittee. That is the PhD committee for your college, for LCF or CSM or CCW or LCC. It's the college, it's the local committee, right? And it has to go there first. And the local committee deals with most of the business on your registration document. The form has to go to University Research Degrees Subcommittee, or certainly be noted as appearing there, but it is not scrutinized very heavily by that committee unless there are particular circumstances. So all the business of registration happens at the local committee. It is registered. Your registration document is acknowledged by the university committee, but it's not heavily scrutinized. So don't worry about too much about these two levels. It matters more as regards ethics, but as regards this, think about the main relationship you're going to have is with your local committee, not with the university committee. Now, regarding that local committee, what does it do? It validates your project. It says, yes, this is a good research project, and we as a committee think it's great, it's good to go. And if you think about it, if the committee says, yeah, looks okay, but I can't be bothered looking at it in detail, and yeah, fine, yeah, that's a bad thing for the committee to do. So if you're thinking, why are they leaning on me? Why are they telling me all these things that they need to fix? It's because they think if you fix these now, then you will be good to go. So it's not simply us being harsh, it's us hopefully caring enough to tell you what we think you need to fix before you move on. So validation is important, process is important, and the committees do the validation. And here's where you are in the stages of a PhD. You enroll, you've done that. You're about to register through this registration document. Once you've registered, you will begin your research, and then halfway through the research, you will do this confirmation stage where you confirm that you have completed an MPhil, well, not completed MPhil stage, you've completed work towards an MPhil and would like to go forward to PhD, or you would prefer to go forward to complete as MPhil. And so what's confirmed at that stage is going forward either to an MPhil exam or a PhD exam. And the PhD exam will only happen if everyone thinks you have enough material and you've read the field sufficiently to make a contribution to knowledge in that field of inquiry. You don't have to have made the contribution, it just has to be likely that you will. So confirmation is an assessment of whether you can safely go forward to PhD. And examination is your viva. So you're at registration stage. And just there's some little diagrams built by Thanasis as to where you are. So you got the form, that's stage one. Hey, you got the form. And then you draft the form and you send it to your supervisory team. Now, this is 1,000 words, right? Plus bits of extra data. So I think you're within your right to say to your team, look, I sent you the form. Could I have some responses in, I don't know, 2 or 3 days? I think that's fair. Don't say, please can I have a response overnight, because that is unfair on them. And also they'll give you a bad response. Just say, look, would it be, if you send it on Wednesday, it would be okay, I think, to ask for some feedback on Friday or maybe Monday, but don't ask for feedback overnight. It's counterproductive for you. You won't get good feedback. So here's the thing, you get the form, you send it to your supervisory team. They say, yeah, this is pretty good, except could you fix this and this? They send it back to you. And then finally the team say, look, this is all done, you're good to go. Send this to the committee. So that's it. So then it reaches committee, and it's reviewed by 2 members of the committee who look at it closely and write a report on it. So it's scrutinized in depth. But everyone else on the committee reads it also, but they don't read it at the same level as these 2 members. And then we also consider the ethical status of the proposal. It may be, you see, that we warn you at this stage. We say, well, hang on, this looks likely to require ethics approval quite soon. So we just send a signal that it would be a good idea if you thought about this. Or we can say, we can think, actually, this isn't the kind of thing that involves ethics approval at all. You'd be surprised how many projects do require some kind of ethical approval. So 2 members of the committee look at it in depth, write reports. All members have a overview of it. So here we are. You've got the form, you send it to your supervisor, your supervisors have cleared it, it goes to College Research Degrees Subcommittee, and the committee might say, look, this is interesting, it's great, it's a good project, but these things need fixing, so they send it back to you, and then you go back through that again, you send it to your team, and they approve it, and it goes back to committee. So committee will give you very clear and precise instructions of what needs doing. They won't simply say, hey, it's not good enough. They will say, please fix this bit, do this, do that. It won't be vague. So then when that's completed and the committee is okay with it, it goes forward to the, sorry, I can't even read that. Yes, it goes forward to the, either it's got minimal ethical risk, in which case it doesn't go to the University Ethics Committee, or it has more than minimal ethical risk, in which case it does go forward. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the University Ethics Committee does sample what happens in colleges just to see where the boundary line is being drawn between minimal and more than minimal. So if it's a project that involves, say, working with children, then it will probably need to be looked at by the University Ethics Committee. So there's nothing good or bad about that. It's simply that some projects are seen as higher risk and require another level of scrutiny. It's not to do with you or anything about your project. It's simply to do with the level of risk involved. So it may be that there's another stage where you have to get your registration document looked at by University Research Ethics Committee. Right. So as I said, once approved, if appropriate, it goes to the University Research Ethics Subcommittee or not. And here's just more detailed guidance on the form. I said this before, but it's worth repeating. What's the difference between an MPhil and a PhD? An MPhil is, as it were, something that's built inside a PhD, because an MPhil is the platform on which you make a PhD happen. An MPhil is a systematic study, critical evaluation of a field, understanding of methods and techniques. And once you've got that, you can say, right, I understand this field very well, therefore I know what needs doing, therefore I can make my move, I can make my contribution to knowledge, which is my PhD. And I think if you're saying, well, what has to be in the registration document? The first thing that has to be in the registration document is that you can show that you know what you are talking about when you mention your field of inquiry. So if you're working in a particular branch of sculptural practice, tell us what the debates are, who the key figures are in that field, what's been going on recently, what the key exhibitions are. And if you lay out the field, then we can understand what your position is within this field. If you don't lay out the field, then we don't understand where you sit or what your orientation is. So you can, as I said, stop at MPhil stage and not go forward to PhD, but every PhD has this MPhil stage within it. Right, here's a bit that Thanasis and I built jointly about field of inquiry, because I keep, I probably should be call myself Malcolm Field of Inquiry Quinn, because I mentioned this phrase so much. But I put this this up here just to illustrate this question of how you define a field. This is by the artist Agnes Deans. It's from 1982. It's her famous wheat field that she grew in New York. And there's the Statue of Liberty. It's a lovely image, but it illustrates perhaps an intuitive problem of fields of inquiry, that you can be lost in them. And there's only one landmark. And I like to think that if you're pursuing the analogy that this one landmark is the one person who did the thing in the field that everyone else refers to. Everyone says, oh yes, we all refer to her. It's her work. And you think, well, hang on, she's there very clearly, but where's everyone else? Maybe they're hiding. So how do we grapple with it? This is what I'm going to deal with now. How do we grapple with this notion of field of inquiry? Well, there's a bit of very simple logic that Thanasis and I think will help you out here. And if you want the fancy Latin name, it's per genus et differentiam. It's simply a bit of logic that says how something belongs to a set but differs from it. So you could say man is a kind of animal but differs from other animals because man writes books. So you put man in a set of animals and then you say, yes, but within this set, man differs from other things in this set because man does things that the other things in this set don't, like write books. So think about this when you're defining your field of inquiry. All this, you think, oh God, where do I even start? Well, use this technique. And here, there's another point that Thanasis and I want to make here, which is about the way fields of inquiry exist as knowledge. Fields of inquiry don't just exist through your reading of them. They exist in databases. They exist in library catalogs. Fields of inquiry are already, before you arrive in them with your great research idea, they're already organized. They're social things, and knowledge within them is classified and organized in various ways. And we are saying use the way that knowledge is classified and organized in your field of inquiry to your advantage, as will become clear in a minute. Anyway, let's start with the logic. So my research is in the field of, let's say, Staffordshire pottery. Right, my research is in the field of Staffordshire pottery. Next bullet point, Staffordshire pottery is a kind of, well, I won't press the point. It's a kind of pottery. Staffordshire pottery is a kind of pottery that is distinguished from other kinds of pottery by various things. From top of my head, the glazes, various other ways it looks. There are certain things that distinguish Staffordshire pottery from every other kind. So this is this basic logic. It's in a set of things, but it differs from the set because of certain characteristics. I think the glazes is one of them. There are probably others. Experts on ceramics will be groaning, but I don't know what they are. Just using this as a very brief example. So then you say, my research focuses on the glazes. Factor C, the glazes. I'm doing a PhD on the glazes in Staffordshire pottery. And when we talk about the glazes, that involves talking about her and him and them and that and the other. The use of the word artist here is deliberate for reasons I will go on to explain. So one way to orient yourself in your field of inquiry is this way, to say, my research is in the field of this. This is a kind of something else, but it's distinguished from this something else by factors A, B, and C. Now, I want to make it clear, you are not required to write your field of inquiry in this way. This is just something we think you could try if you're feeling a bit lost. And I'll explain how this works. So, my research is in the field of something. And Thanasis and I picked a something. We went to the Getty Research Institute database, the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, and we picked a thing more or less at random, which was auto-destructive art. And we said, okay, so the research is going to be in the field of auto-destructive art. And then you look at what the Getty database says, and this is where we come to the organization of knowledge. So you find that somebody's already bothered to sort out what auto-destructive art is, and they say here under number 1, auto-destructive art, it's a kind of process art. So here we get to the logic. There's this set of things called process art, and in process art there's something called auto-destructive art. So there's the beginning of your logic. There's a set called process art, and one of the things in this set is auto-destructive art. So what we have to find out is how auto-destructive art sits in this set and how it differs from other things in this set. So process art is our set, auto-destructive art is our focus. So we've begun. My research is in the field of auto-destructive art. And auto-destructive art is a kind of something distinguished from other kinds of something by factors and this is how you could do it. Auto-destructive art is a kind of, I'll zip forward here, kind of process art. And then you can crack on. My research is in the field of auto-destructive art. It's a kind of process art distinguished from other kinds of process art by these factors. And this is tiny writing here, but we refer to this, it says, refers to art which the process of creating it becomes the subject matter, first applied to the practice in action painting and Tashism in the 40s and 50s, and later to the work of a group of artists working in the late 1960s. The style is characterized by the introduction of time, change, and chance, often resulting in imitation of the artwork's creation. So here's the definition of process art, not autodestructive art. This is the definition of what process art is. And then we get a definition in the database, very handy, of what autodestructive art is. It's art in which the process of destruction of objects, materials, or materials within the work is regarded as the work, and especially work created in the 60s, related to a movement founded by Gustav Metzger. So now we've got the basis of distinguishing autodestructive art from the larger set of process art. And we've highlighted some things here. The process of destruction is regarded as the work. It was created in the 60s by Gustav Metzger. And so then we move on. Autodestructive art is a kind of process art distinguished from other kinds of process art by these factors. Destruction of objects, it was in the 60s, and the leading figure was Gustav Metzger. And then we get to, well, what's your focus? My focus, let's say, for example, is on factor C, Gustav Metzger. So of all the distinguishing factors that make autodestructive art different from other kinds of process art, I'm focusing on this one thing, Gustav Metzger. And if you're looking at Gustav Metzger, you're going to look at other artists around him like John Latham, Ivor Davis, and Yoko Ono. So we're getting near to a full statement here. Here we go. What is your field of inquiry? My research is in the field of autodestructive art. Autodestructive art is a kind of process art that is distinguished from other kinds of process art by these factors. The destruction of objects is considered a process. It took place in the 60s, and it was related to Gustav Metzger. My research contribution focuses on the role of Gustav Metzger. Debates about the role of Gustav Metzger in autodestructive art involve artists John Latham, Ivor Davis, and Yoko Ono, and writers Ian Dawson and John Walker. Now, the point that Thanasis and I are making here is that this statement was, if you like, written, not literally, but conceptually written by a database. It was not written by a human being. This is what the database tells you. We didn't intervene very much in this to create it. It's simply what's there in the database. And that is what we are telling you. When you think about the field of inquiry, the first thing you should think about is how, oh God, no, the Getty's not the only source of information. There's plenty of databases. The Getty is just one example. We're just using the Getty as to say that a library, a database, an archive, they're all organized. They're all organized. Please, I do want to emphasize, by the way, this isn't the only method. It's just a method, a way, a guideline, one database. But the key point is this statement is, as it were, built by a database. We didn't intervene very much, didn't have to do a lot of work to build it. And I'm not suggesting that you write your registration document automatically using databases, but the point is very clear that you know, your field of inquiry isn't something you make up. It's already there. It's already organized. And of course, it may be that your PhD is about the very politics of this organization. It may be about the way that politics gets organized. And a lot of what Thanasis is doing right now is about this question of issues of equality and justice in the way that knowledge is classified. So I'm not saying this is simply something one relies on and says job done. You should be questioning why it is that you know, this is, you know, as it were, the truth of the database. Well, is it the only truth? Are there other truths? Obviously there are, but nonetheless, you should be taking account of how your field of inquiry pre-exists you. It's organized, it's classified, people work in it, they already accept certain kinds of general definitions of this kind. So if you're talking about autodestructive art, people will generally accept that it's a kind of process art, and they'll generally accept these as basic ways to define it. So if you're lost in your field, you don't know where to begin, just work from your topic towards other things and say, oh, here's my topic. Is it a sub-branch of a larger set, and in what ways does it differ, and so forth and so on. But yes, you can consult databases and see the way that is organized. It's just that the Getty is, a fairly reasonable example of something that makes it clear what the definitions are. So, it's jumping around again. Right, I'll go into other parts of the form here. Research question. Questions end with a question mark, with a question mark. So your questions should end with a question mark. Too many questions might mean you do not have one. Yeah, don't multiply questions. 3, possibly 4 questions. Once you get to 5 or 6, that's too many questions, and it seems to be a loss of focus. And the question, as I said a while back when I did my introduction, should be about what you are trying to find out. What are you trying to discover? What are the questions? Should be something like, what are the issues around certain kinds of, around the use of these materials, the recycling of these materials? Why is it that ethics is less considered in this way than something else? So the questions, as it were, from your passion, the passion of your investigation, the thing you're trying to find out, and the sense that you have that some work needs to be done. Why is it that this is the case, or what happens? So these are questions about your curiosity. They're questions about what you want to find out. They're questions about what drives you. And tell us what problem you're tackling. So this is the relationship between a question and a problem. I have a question. The question relates to a problem. The problem is to do with data or ethics. The problem is to do with materials. The problem is to do with politics. The problem is to do with justice. So what's your problem? Guidelines. The aim is the overall purpose of your search. The aim is what you want to achieve. It's what you want to do overall. I want to look at building a visual record as something that doesn't have a visual record. That's my overall aim. This is the second bit, which is objectives. Now, very simply, if my aim is to reach the door, my objectives are to put one foot in front of another until I reach the door. So objectives are simply the steps you take to reach the aim. So objectives could be interviewing somebody. Objectives could be making a 5-minute film. Objectives could be traveling to Berlin. Objectives could be many things, but they are the things that you do on your path to the aim. So it's very simple what the relationship between the two are. Your aim is what you are aiming at. Your objectives are the steps you take to get there. And show us that what you want to do is probably achievable. I.e., if one of your objectives is to do a 7-hour film, whoa there, hang on, how long have you got? And how much money have you got? It's probably not going to happen. So objectives should be realistic within the time frame of a PhD and within the resources that you can have available. And that's why, for example, doing detailed interviews with 50 people just won't happen. It just won't. So objectives should be thought about in relation to whether they will take you to your aim, or whether there's too much there in the objectives for you to reach your aim in the time of your PhD. Guidelines for the form. Historical context. Again, think of this as a question of the field. How did the field develop? You could say, well, 20 years ago, the debates on this issue were mainly concerned with X, Y, and Z. More recently, people have been looking at A, B, and C. I'm focusing on C. So use the history of thought in this field as a way to establish your position. So you say, well, current debates are focused on this, and I'm looking at one aspect of this, or I'm looking slightly to one side of this. So the history here isn't, since the dawn of time. It's the history basically of work in your field. And that will let us know that you're aware of how the field developed. Now, this could be quite a short timeline. You could say, I'm focusing on the past 5 years of debate in circular design. Fair enough. Doesn't have to be the past 50 years, because circular design is of quite a recent term. So don't think, oh God, I've got to have a long history. You've just got to have a good history. And a good history is if you like, a history of your field of inquiry, or field of ideas, or field of theory, or field of practice, as a social organization in which people work and people think and people practice. And how were things back in the 90s on this? How have things developed? Where are we now? Tell us. Contemporary context is current work in the field. And this is where you say, well, I'm working on the Gustav Metzger bit of auto-destructive art, and I'm working on that because nobody's done anything good on Metzger in the past 20 years or something like that. So you're showing why it is that your work is current and why it's going to make a contribution to knowledge. So here, here's the work that needs to be done. And you might say, well, current work in the field is dominated by the work of Lucy and Brian, but actually, although interesting, their work isn't really looking at what I'm focusing on, which will break new ground, because so all this is it's not abstract. It's about your relationship to other people working in this field, and other people who have worked in the field and what they've done. Of course, it may be that you're going to say, well, nothing good has been done in this field since Plato, but it's really unlikely. And that would be a big claim to make. Theoretical context. Demonstrate the ways in which you evaluate your own work and that of others, and the sources that you use to inform your evaluation. This does not mean, theory doesn't mean spray on a lot of philosophy. It just doesn't. Theory means what are the conceptual frameworks you are bringing to bear on your research. And when you think about theory in relation to practice, there's a wonderful quote from Terry Atkinson from an essay he wrote in 1990, where he says, the theory that you don't have a theory is also a theory. So if you're saying, well, actually, I just practice, then that itself forms a conceptual, thing that you're applying to the world. So if you say, well, I don't have a theory, well, that's a theory. So theory doesn't have to be, philosophical or French, or the theory is the conceptual framework you bring. And that conceptual framework could come from philosophy, it could come from many places. But tell us what the conceptual framework is, and how that conceptual framework allows you to reflect on your data and to consider your position in the field. So you might say, well, I'm bringing anthropology to bear on questions of design, or I'm bringing design theory to bear on questions that are unaddressed by anthropology. So it's simply about what theory you need to do the work you have to do. It's not about, hey, if we don't have some theory, then we don't see it as highfalutin enough. No. We don't want theory in general. We want your theory, the one that you use, and we want to know why you're using it. And methodology, and this is where you can see the sign of Thanasis Velios, because the word logos is in there. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating. Methodology is a big, scary word, but it simply means the logos of the methods, the discussion of the methods. In other words, I have 5 methods, and this is why I am using these methods, and this is why these 5 methods work together. So methodology is saying, well, you describe the methods. I'm going to do sculpture in clay. I'm going to do this and that and the other. And the reason I'm doing sculpture in clay is because this will differ from the usual way that things are done in this area. And then also, how are you going to document this? Now, this is also really important. I'm sure other people have said this, but if you are doing a PhD by practice, you have to document the work you do. You have to write about, put in a diary, put in a blog, whatever way, take photographs, gather data, because your examiners will want to see this, will want to see your process. So methodology is about the rationale for the methods. It's also about, the account of the process, and you can't make an account of the process unless you have evidence of the process. So please document your practice-based research as you go, otherwise it won't be there when you get to Viva. So methodology is very simply the discussion of the methods, the rationale of the methods, why you're using these methods, and how you're planning to undertake the work. Yep, you need a work plan, various ways to do this. Gantt chart's one of them, but also put important PhD dates in. So the date when you think you're going to do your confirmation and the date you think you'll do your viva. Nobody will hold you to this, but we want to see that you've got a plan to completion. Yep, e.g. confirmation. And here's a handy thing that Thanasis put in where you can get one here. Bibliography, he suggests Zotero, use a good source of bibliographical records. There are so many ways now of doing this. And finally, in anything at all, perfection is finally attained, not when there's no longer anything to add, but when there is no longer anything to take away. So this goes with what I said about being clear in your writing. It isn't about adding information, it's about giving us the right information and giving us just enough of the right kinds of information. And then just to complete our diagram, you've got from getting the form, showing it to your team approve it, and it gets sent to local committee might send it back, or they might approve it. If when the local committee approves it, it might go for an ethical scrutiny. It then goes for a final moment at the University Research Degree Subcommittee. It's then approved, and then you can register. This all sounds, huge, but it's not really. It's usually fairly simple. It's just that if you stick to the guidelines that I've said, it should be a fairly easy process. I think sometimes people tend to make it overcomplicated and think they have to put the world into a registration document. You don't. You simply have to put the basics in there. And all we want to see is the basics so that we can be sure that you know what you're doing, you're aware of your field, you've got a methodology, you've got a way of moving forward that we can say, yeah, good to go. So don't try and stuff everything in. Keep it simple, keep it direct, and tell us your plans. And, we're really, it's also a great moment for us in committee when we see these projects coming in and we see how exciting they are. And what interesting things people are going to do. So it's not simply a bureaucratic exercise. It's for us to see what you're doing, for you to get the validation from the committee, and for you to feel that you've got the university behind you in your research project. So I'll stop there, and I will take any questions in the last 10 minutes. Anyone has one?
Don't hesitate, folks. You can stick it in the chat if that's how you're most comfortable, or raise your hand and you can jump on the mic. But Malcolm's super about this, so any niggles that you've got, probably had a first crack at this.
Can I share the QR code? Probably. This is the one that Thanasis put in, not me, but there you go.
And Thanasis you'll meet all later today.
Oh, well, good. You can ask him any questions about anything about databases or the politics of classification. He's the man to ask.
Emma, I'm just wondering, Ruth, we'll come to you in a sec. I'm just going to pick up Emma's question about how long the process takes. Do you mean in terms of getting feedback?
Well,
or do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, you get feedback fairly soon, and we aim, we have to get these registration documents done within your first year, and hopefully you can do them in good time within your first year. I mean, this is why I mentioned that the final committee, the ethics committee may become important, but the university committee, although it is important in the sense that it's the top level of ratification, it's not going to scrutinize your application in detail. The focus is on the local committee. Your local college committee is the one you'll have the relationship with when you're doing your registration document. What about work that's interdisciplinary? Well, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, we've got, I'm going to invite Ruth to the microphone. She raised her hand with a question, and then we'll go back to
fine.
Yes.
Hi, I just
go for it. Switch your.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, bingo.
My question is about methodology, because that's probably the bit of the proposal, the registration document I find the most intimidating, because it's sort of finding the official language, because my work is transdisciplinary, so it sits in biodesign between science and design. I know what methods I want to use and I can articulate that, but then when trying to come up with or link it to like an official methodology that I found, so that it's like there's not a list that has all the methodologies and you can pick one. It's quite hard. How do you do that?
No, you don't do that. In a sense, what you have to say is, in a way, the best way to do this is to say, well, there may be some existing methodologies, but I'm going to, you know, as it were, perfect my own here. The methods I'm going to use are going to be organized in a certain way and have a certain logic of connection or sequencing within them that is particular for the question I'm asking. So the important thing to do is that we can see the relationship between your methodology and your question, as in, I'm asking this question in this way, using these methods, according to this sequence, because that's going to get me my data, for example. So you don't have to pick one off a shelf.
Okay.
Although it might be good to, I mean, we would expect perhaps to see a kind of half a sentence on why you're not using one of the standard methodologies, or, you know, what they are, or something like that, so that we know that, you know, you're aware that there would be things you could use even if you're adapting. Just, you remember my story about, just quickly, the story about the British Library life story, the one I told in the introduction, you know, where you know, the difference between doing an interview and doing a British Library life story interview is that the British Library life story interview is history for the next 100, 200 years. Therefore, you're going to ask certain kinds of questions that might seem a bit dumb and get people to explain things in detail that you wouldn't do for an interview in the newspaper. So that's methodology. It's simply the logic of doing things this way that gets you the data you need because of the aims you have in view. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, so don't think you have to pick one that everyone knows.
Back to interdisciplinarity, maybe?
Yeah, well, I think in that sense, it's still a field of inquiry question, because what you're saying is, well, here I am maybe applying design methods to questions that might appear to be standard scientific questions. And this is because in the sciences up to now, the issues that I'm facing haven't been fully addressed, and therefore we need to bring design to bear. So it's still a field of inquiry question. It's just about saying, well, in this field of biology, I'm making this up, you can tell, in this field of biology, there are certain questions around issues which don't get to the important things that I think they could get to if you brought design to bear. So you have to give a rationale and a sense of in which the field that you are entering, as it were, from an art and design perspective, hasn't yet addressed these questions and would need an art and design perspective to address them. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Other questions? We've got 5 minutes. Don't hesitate.
Sorry,
You can ask questions. Please, go.
Sorry, yeah, I had another question just about the research questions and the aims. I understand they're different, but how do you navigate both without having repetition? Because at the moment, the way I'm looking at it, there is a very strong link between the research questions and us. I mean, obviously there should be a very strong link, but I don't want to be repeating myself in the document.
No.
So have you got suggestions for how to kind of
the question is where you start. I want to find out X, and the aim is where you're aiming to get to. So you could say your questions are about ethics in fashion, and you would aim to get a better account of these issues in ethics by the end of the PhD. You see what I mean? So it's one's the beginning. The questions are at the beginning of the research, and the aims are where you would hope to get at the end. And aims refer possibly to product. You know, better policy, better thinking, deeper understanding, more data. You know, just that. Does that help?
Yeah, that's really good. I think the ones at the beginning, ones at the end really clarifies that. So thank you.
Yeah. So aim is where you're getting to, and objectives obviously are the steps you take to get there.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Raise a hand if it's easier to articulate verbally, I mean in speech. Great. Stacey, I'm just going to
thank
switch you
thank
into presenter. Can speak.
Right.
Okay, you're now a presenter,
Oh.
Stacey. Jump on. A question live from Stacey.
Hello,
Stacey.
hello. I think I'm still stuck on your fields of inquiry, but I just wanted to know. No, and I appreciate it because it's quite method. Oh, I can't say that word now.
Neither can I. Like
yeah,
the word
it's
I can never say
completely gone from my mind. But yeah, it's straightforward is the word I was looking for. But in terms of where I could go, all right. So my field is I'm looking at carnival, compassion, and curation for social change.
Right.
Right. And just while you were talking, I thought, oh, I'll go look it up on Getty. Getty's got nothing that comes up, or maybe I'm not searching correctly.
Well, there's the politics of the archive right there.
Right. And so then I did this. I just randomly searched research catalog. So I guess my question is, can you suggest some areas that I could go look to see if there is an existing field and what it's like?
I think you've done exactly what you should do as a good researcher. You've begun by saying, hey, isn't it interesting that this doesn't appear in the Getty database? So first of all, I think I would say, the way that knowledge of carnival is organized is perhaps, not a lot of it won't be in standard archives. To give you an example of what I mean here, one of the best weeks of my life was in 2009 when I got asked to do a bit of observation on an oral history of the education department at Tate Gallery. And the reason they were doing an oral history of the Tate Education Department, interviewing people who'd worked in it, was because nobody thought the education department was worth preserving records for, and they'd all been thrown away. So we were literally kind of getting the data from people speaking. So I think it would be important for you to say, well, maybe the data I need is in talking to people. Maybe the data I need is in, what might be called grey literature, that is literature which isn't standard academic work. And I think that's immensely interesting. I know that doesn't help you right now, but I mean, there's also, there's simple things like Google Scholar. Now, they're not, as it were, academically very respectable, but they give you a quick look. You say, well, what's been written about carnival in the past 2 years? It's quite simple. You just use it and see what there is, and then you can follow those things up and get into more detail. So I think two things. One is you can do fairly quick work on open databases, and secondly, I think you've got an immensely interesting story to tell about why things aren't in official archives.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah. Are we? I think we're at time now, aren't we? So
we are. We're bang on, and I'm keen that people take a break. So I'm going to say a big thank you, Malcolm.
Oh, thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. I always enjoy doing this session.
Oh. I'm going to take one more. Malcolm, can we steal you for one more question? Because the hand's just gone up. Are you okay, or are you dashing to another?
Yeah, no, fine. No, good.
Thank you. I'm just going to make Zihan Wang a presenter, so he, excuse me, they're not sure. Please jump on the mic. You should be able to use your mic now. Don't hesitate with your question.
Hi. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, I can hear you.
Nice to see you, and thank you for your share. Yeah, but right now I just have the questions around the resource required. Yeah, because I that in my registration form that the resource required. I mean that if the research committee find that something what I required needed that cannot be supplied, and we are then I mean that then we are probably won't able to let me go afford at same as the training list. So I just wonder that where could I?
No, of course. Well, what I would do, Zihan, is talk to your supervisory team, talk to your supervisor, your lead supervisor about this, and just that you need to check with them that whatever you want is available within this university, because obviously we can't supply things that we don't have. The other thing you need to think is, okay, if I want a certain resource, is it absolutely essential to my research? Or could I find an alternative? Now, if you have something that's essential to your research that the university doesn't have, then that may be a bit of a problem. But hopefully that won't be the case. I think I would really open a conversation with your supervisor about this and say, can you please help me check whether this is going to be available from the university, whether I can access it, so forth and so on. So yeah, it's important that you do signal to us that you will need something during the course of your PhD, but only if it's something that this university can supply. Lucy, do you have any thoughts on that? Because
just struggling. Sorry, I know. I think that's the only answer we can give. I think it's not an easy one, but
yeah. Okay, but talk to your supervisor, because they will be the one who can.